All right, what's up, everybody? Alex here. Welcome to the video and a very special edition, I guess, of the show. I'm really grateful to be here with two uh, good friends and great fellow members of the vinyl community here. Rob over at Northern Revolutions, Brian over at Embryonic Robot, for kind of a Father's Day special discussion about. Uh, our musical journeys and how they sort of related to the relationship that we had with our fathers. So this will be airing on Father's Day. You might be watching it at a different time, but we actually, myself, Rob, and Brian, sort of connected over the last, I don't know, several months, realizing that we all sort of lost our dads in almost the same year around the same time. And so wanted to use this as maybe an opportunity to sort of bring together some people and talk about our dads and their impact on us from a musical standpoint, or songs, or memories, or records, or any of those different things, and maybe focus more on some of the positive side of this experience, knowing that we've lost them, gosh, 14, 15 years ago now, which is wild to think about. So yeah, again, just Brian, Rob, thank you so much for being here and joining me for this, and would love to kind of just go around and maybe before we jump into records or songs or all these different things, maybe just a little bit of a intro to the relationship, the musical relationship, I guess, that you had with your dad. What role did he play, if any, in kind of getting this into this ridiculous hobby that we have, and so much so that we go on YouTube and tell everybody how ridiculous our hobby is. So yeah, Rob, I'll start with you, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned to you before, Alex, I mean, music and records and my dad are just so inextricably interwoven. I mean, it's a thread that winds together. I mean, I was close with my dad. I mean, I was an only child, am an only child. So was my dad, actually. And so was my son, which is kind of weird. But so I didn't have any siblings, right? So it was me and mom and dad. And dad and I were close. We did a lot of things together. When I was in my late teenage years and in university, we, as father and sons do, but we still had, those common interests. And music was a big thing for dad, like it is for me. I mean, it's, to your point, it's such a big thing. I get on YouTube and talk about it like I think some people are actually going to care what I have to say, right? So dad was that big of a music fan too, and music and records are the first thing I think about when I think about dad, because in our house when I was growing up, there was a stereo system in the living room, and there was probably 700 or 800 records there, much like I have now, and there was always music playing. And I didn't get into music till I was probably 14 or so. But when I did, it was kind of an even bigger of a bonding thing for dad and I. We'd go to record shows, and you know he'd be trying to introduce me to music and that kind of thing. And so it's always a memory, and it's always kind of a thing. And when he passed, music was my therapy, and listening to records was what got me through dealing with his death, which I'll spare everyone the details, but was quite unexpected. And let's just say the stuff that nightmares are made of. So music got me through that. I mean, I still struggle with it now, 15 years later, but music got me through it. And now it's to the point that, there's pictures of my dad hanging on the wall. I can see him right now. I've got one on my desk here as well. This is kind of where I kind of feel like I'm with him, even though he's not here. I don't know. I'm not a spiritual or religious person, but I just sort of feel that connection to him. And I have his stereo and some of his records. And just, it kind of feels like even though he's not here, he's here when I'm listening to music. So it's an important thing for me.
Awesome. Yeah, Brian?
Yeah, I would characterize my father as a fun guy, a fun-loving guy, a guy that liked to have people around, like to party, not party in the sense of excess, but have friends over, that kind of guy. He was, and so music, I think, tied everything together. There was never a time when friends were over that he didn't have music on. So I always see him as, the kind of guy that would think about that. Whereas some people would get together, they wouldn't even think about putting music up. He would have like the 8-track player going, or a record, or even the radio. And so much so that he really liked to adopt. He did get a CD player eventually, but the big thing for him was a cassette player in his car, because although he could listen to the radio, what he really wanted to do was listen to the albums that he loved in the car, and that just was perfect for him. So I always think of him as a fun-loving guy who was passionate about music. And we didn't share a lot of music that we liked, some, but for me, the one big takeaway for me is his passion for music. Now, I have 3 older siblings who, when you think about it, should be, and they were a model for the kind of music that I eventually started to like, but they didn't seem to express the same passion as he did. They would be, they'd be in the room listening to music, but because the stereo was the focal point of the living room, if I was down there being the youngest, I would be exposed to whatever he was listening to. So, we did share some common experiences, but just the whole idea that music was a companion to whatever we were doing, that was always on. My mother to a certain extent, but my father was even more of the guy that wanted to have the music around, and he was sort of a little bit adventurous. Probably, I'm going to guess he's a bit older than I think I'm older than you guys. I think he would have been a bit older, so music was maybe a little different generation. But he was always willing to sort of expand his horizons and see what else was out there. And I just found that, I think when I think about him, I do think about music. It's one of those things that does come up. It's just one of those things about him that everyone knew. He was liked to crack jokes. He was a bit of a practical joker, and he loved to have the music going. So that's kind of a general comment, I guess, to get things going here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, and this plays a role probably in what we're gonna, share and talk about too. Is that, I didn't have a particularly musical relationship with my dad. I think, but I do credit him for liking music that is, 40 years before my time, if that. So it was interesting that I always joke. I grew up in the mid 2000s, so. I was a teenager, I guess, in 2003, something like that. And so all my friends or peers at that point in time were all listening to, whatever pop radio was at the time. I mean, that's all it was. And it was funny. It was a learning moment because I realized that my friends controlled their parents' radios, which is weird. Like thinking of when I would be in the car with a friend, we'd be listening to what the kid wanted to listen to. We would not be listening to what the parents wanted to. And so I thought that was bizarre. And I tried that on my parents and they did not let me. So it was stuck on, classic rock radio. I mean, that was sort of just what I grew up on, was classic rock radio. And eventually that's what I fell in love with and started listening to. So I think the relationship was that it was just I was exposed to music that he grew up with. He was born in 55. So, he would have been 15 in 1970. And so, he definitely sort of the golden years of a lot of these things. So I think for me, the relationship part to begin with was that I was just finding myself very interested in music that he liked when he was growing up. And I didn't care what was coming out in 2003 or 5 or whatever. And, so I think that, inherently played a role where we would get to, a little bit later on, it would be like, kind of like we'd be playing Name That Tune. You know what I mean? It would be like, how long does it take us to name the song sort of thing? And I think that just played a huge kind of part with it. And, later on I was getting involved with music. And so he would always, come to see my band play, and, we would do concerts and all those different things, which I'll talk a little bit about. But, it wasn't necessarily, music is what tied us together per se or anything like that. But there was definitely, I do credit him and my mom to a lesser extent too, of exposing me to a lot of this music that eventually I ended up falling in love with, probably begrudgingly at first. But, that's why people ask all the time, like, why are you, it's like, why are you so much into this music? And it's like, I was listening to, Jethro Tull when I was 13. And, so that's sort of our relationship with it. But yeah, and I think that kind of is reflective of the records I'll show. It's more based on some memories and connection points or concert experiences and all those kind of things. So I don't know if you all want to kind of go like around the horn per se, and just sort of share a little bit and why you picked the albums that you did or whatever. And does that, Rob, sound good there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I got a bunch here. I guess I'll start with the one that had the biggest impact for me. Beatlemania with the Beatles, the first Canadian Beatles album, which is the same as With the Beatles in the UK. This actually is my dad's copy. He wrote his name up here in the corner, and it's in fantastic condition. He had most of the Beatles records, and he listened. So my dad was born in 1948, so he was 30 when I was born. But when I was getting into music in the 90s, I was interested in some of the 90s stuff. But, Dad's record collection, thank goodness, was the Beatles and Hendrix and Pink Floyd and Creedence and, all of that great stuff. And he had a lot of blues and jazz, which, I didn't gravitate to as much. But like a lot of folks, I sort of stumbled into the Beatles kind of as that was my entry point. And so the first one that I sort of grabbed was this one. Why this one? I don't know. I still have his Abbey Road and his White Album. And, this was just kind of the one that I sort of remember pulling first. And the Beatles are still my favorite band and likely always will be, and like many people are all over the soundtrack of our lives. And pulling this from my dad's record collection and listening to it repeatedly, and consequently when I started my own record collection, he gave me his Beatles records. So this whole thing that I do on YouTube and this whole passion for listening to music and owning records starts with this exact copy, which has my dad's name on it, that he bought in 1964. So I love the album, but more so I love that, reminds me of, essentially this gift from dad, and the gift not really being the record, but the gift being the love of music that he passed on to me. And it all started here.
Awesome.
Great. I don't actually have any of my dad's records. My stepmom still has some of them, and I'm pretty sure I know what's in there. So I'll just make a couple of mentions of certain acts that I guess I heard first in our house. So my dad was a big fan, and I'll show one record. My dad was a big fan of people like Mario Lanza, Bing Crosby, Dean Martin, the Andrews Sisters, Doris Day, even, and then in later years, Robert Goulet, Roger Whittaker, things like that. I think you get the picture. And one act he really liked was the Irish Rovers in later years. But my dad liked to always sing around the house, and so one record that always reminds me of him, and this was not his copy, but he really liked Frank Sinatra. This is going to make him seem a bit old, but Frank Sinatra. And I just grabbed this. I have a few Frank Sinatra records, but he would often sing around the house, and he would sing Strangers in the Night for some reason. I don't know why that. There's a few songs he just liked to sing over and over again. I don't know why this particular one. And I don't think he was actually a really big Frank Sinatra song, but it's one of those songs that he felt, I guess, comfortable singing as he's walking around the house. I'm not even sure he had a Frank Sinatra record, but when I think of him, I think of this for some reason. I guess because he knew the song and would sing it. But his sort of musical taste did evolve, which I really appreciate. I didn't get stuck in a certain time period, and but this one, I guess, is a good place to start because it's one of the earliest songs I really remember about him. And then he changed I'd say his musical taste changed quite a bit, but this one is the one that probably made me aware that there were songs that he liked. Perhaps I'll say it that way. But yeah, it's sort of like the introductory point maybe for my dad's collection. I'll just mention briefly, like another guy was Nat King Cole. This is like a box set of 4 CDs from 1992 of Nat King Cole. That's another guy that he seemed to really like in the early days. I'm throwing two at once here, but that's sort of where my memory of his music kind of started, and that kind of, along with Bing Crosby and Dean Martin, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of where I was thinking too. I was thinking like, what was the first time not necessarily the first music I heard, but what was like the first time I heard like an album, or, you know, I feel like the house I grew up in, like my parents played like the same 5 CDs. You know, it was like the whole time I was like the same 5. And actually, that's kind of where I'll start, I think, because I remember these two. If someone asked me like, what are my earliest memories of fully listening to an album where I could go, yes, that's the artist, that's the record, like that sort of thing. And I talked about this in whatever, that there was a thread going around about, like, you know, the 10 most important albums of our lives and all that kind of thing. And for me, I'll show 2 of them quick. These were the first ones I ever remember hearing, and that was the Boston debut. I mean, I just, this record is just ingrained, and not just because of FM radio. I think it was like all over, it still is, but I mean, I remember hearing this all the time. My dad was a huge Boston fan, and actually I think he was a huge fan of sort of a lot of different acts within this sort of vein, this sort of later 70s. I hate to call it like AOR, but you know, I mean, we're talking the big FM hits that sold a gazillion copies. I'll talk about somebody else who did that here in a little bit, but I just remember hearing this all the time. And actually, it was funny. It was until right now I realized this is a fun little. It's a promo. Look at that. Okay, you know, you got to still got to be a member of the VC and call out the promos when you have them. But the other record I remember hearing all the time, and this is still, I love this record. This is my favorite record from this band, and I just can remember constantly hearing the song "Can't Get It Out of My Head," and I still just remember that coming from the living room all the time. And that was ELO's El Dorado. They would play this all the time. So I mean, I probably remember at this point I was 11 or 12 maybe, and just hearing both of these albums constantly. And so it's interesting that I didn't get tired of them. You know, it's like a lot of times you are like, oh my gosh, like my parents played that album to death, I'm tired of hearing about it. But for me, it was almost the opposite. It, you know, had like this effect of, you know, oh yeah, like I grew up with that.
Yep.
And so yeah, those 2 albums specifically, I remember hearing all the time. And still, I mean, I still love that Boston record. I don't care how many times I hear those songs, they still sound new and fresh to me. And then maybe not necessarily the ELO record that people talk about all the time. They're still kind of in their quote unquote prog days, and this is certainly a progressive album, but yeah, absolutely still love this to this day, and kind of what I grew up with. So yeah.
Nice.
Rob,
My turn again. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to show 3 at sort of one right after the other because it's the same band, but they're 3 separate stories, but it kind of relates. I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
Dad's favorite band was Fleetwood Mac.
Mm.
Every version of Fleetwood Mac. Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac was his preferred Fleetwood Mac. Loved the Rumors Fleetwood Mac. Loved the incarnations of Fleetwood Mac. After that, loved everything that Fleetwood Mac did. So, I mean, like everyone else that discovers Fleetwood Mac, I mean, I'm like, Rumors was just like, whoa. And I don't care that it's played a bazillion times or it's overplayed. It's one of the best albums ever made. So, you know, whatever. I own several copies of it and I listen to it, but I'm not going to show Rumors. I'm going to start with the original self-titled Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. So Dad didn't have this album for whatever reason, but he loved Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and I knew if I was ever at record shopping or whatever, you know, bearing in mind, record shopping in the 1990s is not what it is today. There's not a lot of record stores. There were music stores, but not record stores. And there wasn't record shows like there are today. There was like one a year that I remember that was within like an hour of my house. It's not like every weekend now you can go to a record show. So it wasn't necessarily as easy to find records in the early 90s because everyone's just like, records are dead, right? So I bought this copy for my dad. And this is a Simply Vinyl repress from around about 2000. And I bought this for him. I was in London, England on spring break with my girlfriend because her dad lived in Switzerland. So we went over there for a reading week vacation, and we flew up to London for a couple days. And I went into Tower Records at Piccadilly Circus, which was just incredible. And I'm flipping through and I see lots of stuff. The only thing that I bought was this record for my dad because I knew he didn't have it. I brought it home on the plane and then gave it to him. And then when he passed away, obviously I kept it because huge sentimental value. I listen to it from time to time, but it doesn't matter. This was his, and it will always be his, and it was my gift to him. So that's the first Fleetwood Mac that I want to show. The second one I want to show, and I've told this story on my channel before. I think I've told the next two stories on my channel before, but Say You Will. This was the tour they did around 2000 and I don't know, 2, 3, something like that. It was the Rumors lineup minus Christine McVie, who unfortunately was Dad's favorite, but he had never seen Fleetwood Mac before. And when they toured for this album, they came to Toronto. I scraped together what little money I had because I think I was probably still in university or just finished. I saved up, I bought tickets, and I was running with him in the car one day, and Peacekeeper, which was a single off of this, came on the radio, and he goes, man, I'd really like to go see them. And I said, well, Dad, I got us tickets. And this was the one and only concert Dad and I ever went to together. And it was awesome to sit there, and in mid-concert, I look at him. I'd never seen the man look so happy because he finally got to see Fleetwood Mac. So that's great. And the last one, it's a sad story, and I'll keep the sad part of it short. And I've told this story on my channel. The Fleetwood Mac album that nobody cares about, Time, which was the one-off lineup with Becca Bramlett, Dave Mason, and Billy Burnett. This more than anything makes me think of Dad in kind of a sad way, because the night that he passed away, quite tragically, when I eventually got home that night, I went down to my office at our old house, and I went to my Fleetwood Mac section, and I just grabbed, and this happened to be the first Fleetwood Mac album that I grabbed, and I played it. And I will always, it's always tied to that night. And yeah, it's sad, but it's also, it kind of made me feel a little bit better. So that's the power of music for you.
That was your coping. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear that.
Very good. Yeah. I was thinking about, in relation to this topic, I have kids of my own, and I found there's a sort of a trajectory where they kind of accept your music that you're playing in the house. And then at some point they kind of feel like they need to strike out on their own. So my youngest is a Swiftie. Well, no offense to you, Ron, but she's a Swiftie. And but I was thinking about that.
Oh, you're talking to two Swifties here.
Yeah. So
Fine,
I was thinking about that in the context of also favorite songs, because a few years ago, if you'd asked them, what's your favorite song, they would have picked something that they heard me play. But this is a case where, in fact, this album, this is not my dad's copy, but this Gordon Lightfoot record, Summertime Dream, I did buy him a copy of this for Christmas one year. So this was a Christmas present, not this specific copy, but for him one year. And I remember it specifically because at the time I would have said that the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was my favorite song. In fact, it was a lot of people's favorite song at the time, I guess. So that song, of all the songs that I know he knew, that would be the one that I think we have most connection with, because I really liked it. He really liked it. I liked this album. I gave him a copy of this album. And, it didn't endure, it didn't remain my favorite song, but I remember thinking that, yes, it was. And even before that, I don't have a record for this, but Marty Robbins is somebody my dad really liked. And, those gunslinger ballads, that kind of thing. I wish I had that record actually, but there was a song that on one of the records called Big Iron. And for the longest time when I was a kid, anybody asked me, that was my favorite song. And I only knew it because he played it. And I knew that album inside and out, and this album, of course. And so it made me think of the whole concept of your favorite song when you're a kid is often not one that you would have chosen just because you liked it. It's because you heard it at home. My dad would play it many times. So those two tracks in particular, Big Iron and the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, were favorite songs for me. And this particular record, I bought it a used copy because I knew that I remembered, of course, that I had given him this copy of this record. That's mainly why I bought it, but it does bring back memories of listening to that song and listening to this record. So that's that. Yeah, sad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well, not that this helps, but I was like, damn, that is a great song. Wreck of the
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is one of those songs. I mean, there's a handful of them where you're like, yeah, I hear it every day and I'm still not tired of it. That's one of them.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Well, this was an interesting time of my life here because my dad was very similar to me in this way. And actually, this probably won't. You'll probably be surprised to hear this because of who I am, at least on the internet. But I'm in my personal life a lot more introverted and a little bit more reserved. And I'm not really the
I
first one.
find that hard to believe.
I know, it's like, but that's the thing. I do the YouTube to get away from who I am in real life, But so much that I get from my dad. I mean, he was just so laid back, introverted, reserved. Everything was like, okay, cool, like whatever, we'll figure it out. Like, I mean, I think that's something that I definitely got from him in a lot of different aspects of my life. But along with that, he was never one to, be out, to put himself out there. I mean, I remember even earlier than like the music thing, playing on like sports teams and stuff like that. And you would have, you would have all these crazy parents running around, like the kids who would, the people in the back of the left field who were drinking beers and stuff. And there was always part of me that was like, oh, Dad, you should join them, man. Like we need the social capital. But he just didn't even care about any of that. So I'll fast forward to 8th grade, or as you two like to say, grade 8.
Great.
And
I appreciate that you recognize the cultural difference of that.
Yeah.
of course. I'm probably not up there, but I'm sure you all had something similar. At least in the States, it is like, I kind of joke about it, but it always ends up being true. It is like the universal 8th grade thing that you take a field trip to Washington, D.C.
Oh, right.
That was just
we do them, but
every
it's
8th
either
grader-
Washington. It's usually either Washington or mine was when I was in grade, it was Quebec City, but same idea. Yeah, it's like a rite of passage kind of thing.
Yes, it is like an academic, like
you're away from mom and dad for like 4 days.
And I just remember there are so many people I talked to that talk about their 8th grade field trip to DC. Yep. And I was like, how did they fit all these kids? It's okay. But what was so, I had, you had the thing, I had the form where it was like, yeah, you got to take this, there's permission slip home and, there's money involved and all these different things. And I remember jokingly, I was, I guess, 13 or 14, jokingly saying like, oh, Dad, they're looking for chaperones. You should go. And he goes, yeah, why not? And so I still is so puzzled. Even still to this day, it blows my mind because he seemingly was the least likely person to be a chaperone. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it was like the parents who wanted to be chaperones were not the parents that you wanted to hang out with. I mean, it was like, I was like, Dad, really? You want to do this? And he's like, why not? It's, a cheap trip to DC. And I was like, you're not wrong. And so, I was sitting there and, and this is also the chance I'm like, wow, like I'm going to be with my dad with all my peers, my classmates. Like they don't know him. Like this is kind of nerve wracking. It was all these different things. And of course we got like the 10-hour bus drive there. And, we stop at Gettysburg and we got the 10-hour bus drive, all these different things. And of course, in these days we had the Walkman. That was your way of listening to music portably. And I remember we had 2 CDs. We had one Walkman, but 2 CDs. So we would like trade back and forth. It was this whole thing. And at first I will say, the trip was amazing. And it was just so funny because again, he was like the most laid back person ever. So people thought they were like getting in trouble. And he's like, I don't care. But it was so funny to me that we had 2 CDs and we were trading them back and forth. And what's so funny about this is they were my CDs. They weren't his, but he loved them. And I thought that was like the funniest thing because I had no idea that he was into this type of music. Not a clue. And especially because I'm here joined by 2 of my best Canadian friends. One of them was Rush 2112.
Wow.
I had never heard he just was like, yeah, give me the Walkman. I want to listen to some music. And he was digging it and jamming it. And then he'd finish it. He would give the Walkman back to me. I would listen to it. And like still to this day, like it's one of those things, like when I hear Temples of Syrinx, I I transformed back to 8th grade on a freaking bus, with a bunch of kids listening to, Usher.
Wow.
And me and my dad are trading, Rush 2112 back and forth.
That is awesome. I
And
love
That's
it.
amazing.
like, that was the one record, and the other record, and still to this day, one of my favorite albums, and so much of it is tied to that, is Jethro Tull's Aqualung. Those were the two CDs that we had, played them back and forth all the time, and I distinctly remember him telling me, it's still like stuck in my mind, of him talking about I think his quote was like, what a badass flute solo that is in Locomotive Breath, which, for people who know Locomotive Breath, I mean, that's what it's all about. It's the badass flute solo. And so I'm just like, it's so funny to me that today, I mean, Rush and Jethro Tull are probably both in my top 10 bands of all time, at least. They gotta be. And so it is just so funny. Like, these are the two CDs we had, 10-hour bus drive there, 10-hour bus ride back, and we just traded them back and forth for the whole time. So yeah, those are the two that we went with when I was probably, I guess, 13, 14 at that time.
That's
Oh,
incredible.
I love that story. All right. So, as I said, it was like 94 when I was, I don't know, 15-ish, I guess, discovering music. It started on my journey of discovery, with the Beatles, and I was kind of trying to branch out from there. And Dad wasn't, he wasn't saying you should listen. He was saying anything. Whatever I wanted to listen to his records, knock myself out. But every morning there was Mom and I, because Dad would leave for work early in the morning, we getting ready for school, and the radio station in our town was an oldies radio station, which back then meant, 50s, 60s, 70s. Okay. And so one morning I heard Up on Cripple Creek by the band. And I'm like, damn, I absolutely love that song. And I heard it a couple days later. I'm like, damn, I love that song. So I was walking around the house one day singing what the part of the verse I could remember from Up on Cripple Creek. And my dad, we kind of sort of passed each other in the living room. And he kind of stopped. And he went, hold on a sec. And he goes over to his records and he pulls out the band's Brown album. He didn't say anything. He just gave it to me. And I looked, Up on Cripple Creek. So I nodded the turntable. So I went over and I put it on. And from the first time I heard this album, I fell in love with it. And they're still my second or third favorite band of all time. It's just so incredible. And, it's so much of my musical preference these days. For those that have watched my channel before, I talk way too much about Canadian music and, whatever that Canadian sound is, whatever. I mean, these guys are kind of really like the pioneers, along with Gordon Lightfoot, of sort of carving out that kind of scene. So this holds such a monumental place in the albums that have shaped me. And I will always remember him just, he was quite thrilled that, as my friends are listening to at that time, that's when Nirvana was hitting it big, and that whole Seattle grunge thing, which didn't interest me and still doesn't to this day. My friends are listening to that, and I'm listening to the band. So I think he had some quiet satisfaction in that. And the other thing to say about this is, like my Beatles album, this is Dad's copy that he bought the day that it came out, and I still have it. So
Very nice.
And interesting, right, Rob? There, a band that so perfectly epitomizes the Canadian sound so much that it really created the term Americana.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah, Brian.
All right. Well, anybody who's watched my channel and has been lucky enough to see a video, which I mentioned my dad, I love mentioned, and I don't have a record. Well, I have two records to show, but one record to talk about, one record to show. And that is that my dad's favorite band of all time is ABBA. And I really struggle with ABBA because I guess it's that situation where you're put in a situation where you cannot escape the music. So
Yep.
my classic example is I'm driving in his car while I'm the passenger. We're going somewhere I want to go, and the ABBA cassette is spinning around, and I can't get out because I don't want to walk, but I have to stay in the car. And so, this is the period of time where he discovered. I mean, he always knew female singers, but he seemed to have a special affection for female singers. So that happened. So ABBA, and I blame my sister because my sister purchased an ABBA 8-track for my dad, and he played it relentlessly. And then he bought, like, he's the kind of guy that had, I guess I recognize this in him that well, about him that I recognize in myself is the sort of completionist tendency. So he'd have all of the ABBA records on vinyl, all of the ABBA records on 8-track, and then he would ask me, because I had at one point a stereo system where I could make copies. He'd give me blank tapes, put my ABBA records on the cassette so I could listen to them in my car, which I did, not happily, because I didn't want to hear ABBA. By the way, I think those are the records my stepmother still has. So there's that sort of fanatical aspect of music that I see in myself about certain artists, and the completionist thing that I see in him. But my sister one year also gave my dad, and Rob, you already talked about Fleetwood Mac. I have to mention this again. So rumors, my sister bought my dad an 8-track of this. And I've mentioned this story on my channel before because he fell in love with this album. And he would do that crazy thing with 8-tracks where he'd, lunchtime, he'd throw an 8-track in, and at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night, the same one is still playing. So I was kind of a social butterfly. I like to be around, see what's going on in the main floor. I didn't have my own stereo system at that point. And so I just listened to whatever is being played. And unfortunately, or fortunately, well, I guess it depends the way you look at it. ABBA was unfortunate. This one, though, I actually grew to really love this record. And it is kind of an outlier in my collection because it's the only Fleetwood Mac record I have. I'm not a huge fan. I've never even heard the early stuff. I've never heard Tusk, but this one, and I've heard it so many times. I can't even count the number of times I've heard it. My only saving grace on this is that he didn't have a cassette copy for his car. So this record will forever remind me of my father. And I guess the positive thing about this is that I actually still like this record. And that is really great because it does have strong memories. So every song, I'm just thinking, I can just picture being in the living room, listening to that. And I don't have the same appreciation for ABBA. Maybe that's coming when I'm a bit older. I was born in a small town outside of Toronto. And when ABBA played their last tour, you could tell there was this internal battle with him. He wanted to go, but he didn't want to have to go to Toronto because he'd never been there since the 50s. And so he had this struggle. And later on, he regretted it. And he said, I should have gone. I don't know why I was so stupid. But I'm sad that he never got to see them because it was just it would have been the last great piece of his ABBA journey, and he never got it. And of course, he didn't know about the last ABBA record, of course, because that came out many, many years later. But Fleetwood Mac Rumors will always be, for me, a dad record. So, and the weird thing is, I have 4 kids. My older ones, who are in 19 and 23, they love this record. They love it. And I was wondering, how do you even know what this record is? But they absolutely love it. So it's kind of multi-generational. So
it was the cranberry juice skateboarder TikTok.
Must have been.
It could have been that. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, well, it is funny. The record sells a gazillion copies and then shows up twice in our list, so it would only make sense, right?
Yeah.
There's no Fleetwood Mac in my list, but yeah. Well, and funny. So jumping so this would have been, trying to do the math here. I guess the 8th grade field trip would have been, I guess, or late spring. I remember it was pretty hot or whatever. Late spring, 2004, maybe 3 or 4, whatever it was. But I think it was later that summer, or maybe it was the summer of the next year. It doesn't really matter. But kind of going into when I was 14 or 15 and surround myself more with music and friends who were into music and all that kind of stuff, I started going to my first concerts. Rob, I know I've shared this story with you a couple of different times. It's a band that we both love, but you both know this, concerts when you're young, it's tough. It's Brian was talking oh my gosh, we have to go all the way into Toronto for this. what was so funny is I grew up about 30 miles, whatever that equates to in kilometers, friends, 30 miles outside of Cleveland. And of course, Cleveland, a ton of great rock and roll shows, but it was so funny, now being in, the heart of a major city where it's I could get to a concert in 10 minutes, But when you were 13, 14, it was like a whole ordeal. It was like, who's driving? Like, who's paying? Like, how are we getting home? Can we get home? Like, they don't just drop you off and come back later. Not in downtown Cleveland. Are you crazy? Like sort of thing. So it was always this interesting thing of like, you had to convince, your parents to take you to one of these places you wanted to go. And so technically my very first concert I always talk about was just me and my friends outside of Cleveland. But I was so obsessed with the band at the time, I had to convince my dad to take me to the same show 3 days later, which happened to be in Lansing, Michigan. So for the non-geographical people, we were coming from Cleveland-ish, Ohio, up to the capital of Michigan. I mean, we're talking probably 4 to 5 hours, all the way to a minor league ballpark to see my favorite band at the time, Def Leppard. And of course, they were doing this minor league baseball tour. They're modeling it off of Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson, who did it a couple of years previously. And ironically enough, they're doing like the same. Well, they're back on tour together now. But since I'm here again with my favorite Canadian friends, it was a co-headline with one Bryan Adams. And so I would say my dad probably was a bigger Bryan Adams fan than he was a Def Leppard fan. I think like most people, he probably just associated Def Leppard with, cheesy 80s hair metal type stuff, while Bryan Adams was a little bit more, centric singer, songwriter, hooks galore, all that kind of stuff. And so it was so interesting me of begging him to take me, and eventually he did. And not only that, he would take me to see Def Leppard 3 times over the next 2 years, all about 5 hours away from where we lived. And so it was one of those things where I was I was probably 14, 15, so in love with this band. And he took me to those shows. So the first time around, it was Def Leppard and Bryan Adams. The second time around, it was Def Leppard actually on this tour, on the Yeah tour, which is their covers album from 2006, with Journey. And then the following year, or later that year even, it was with Cheap Trick. And so it was one of these things that, he was into that type of music. It wasn't like he was against it, but it was so funny because I think he got so much more out of whoever the other acts were than the actual band that I was in love with. He was like, oh, wait, like, I don't want to go to Def Leppard again. I was like, yeah, but they're also playing with Journey. And he's like, oh, all right, let's go. So, looking back now, I'm just like, I think, especially just the relationship, and I don't think I connected to it at the time, which I think is obviously sad, is that, and I'm not a father, so these are not things I can relate to in that way, but was thinking to myself, he probably had no interest in going to these shows at all. Absolutely none. But he knew it was important to me. And it was a chance for us to connect in that way. And I just think about that now of like, I mean, these were these were 4 or 5 hours away. Like, these were not just down the street type shows, It's like I go to a show here and I'm home by 11, So yeah, that's something I don't think I really understood until years later of, this I don't want to say like the sacrifice per se, but yeah, I mean, no one wants to get in the car and drive 5 hours to go to a concert they don't want to go to just because their dumb kid wants to see the one-armed drummer, So
that's what we do for our kids, though.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, of course, both Def Leppard and Bryan Adams, those times that we saw them, like I still hear some of that music today and think of the songs that he loved and the songs that we connected on and the songs that we didn't love and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was a lot of our musical stuff between probably years 2004, 2006. We're firmly in that sort of camp. So yeah.
Love that, man. That's awesome. That's awesome. I remember when that Bryan Adams Def Leppard tour rolled into town because they played Toronto, and I wanted to go, but I couldn't quite afford to go because that was not too long after I was at a university, student loans and all that other stuff, and hadn't established myself in a career yet, and I just couldn't afford it and didn't have a car yet at that point in time. Really kicked myself for not going because Bryan Adams and Def Leppard. I mean.
Well, and I do remember they were all minor league stadiums. I don't know if maybe Canada they were in a bigger one because it was Bryan.
I think here they played Molson Amphitheater. I think
I mean, yeah, I mean, I would guess that would be a bigger draw up there. I mean, Def Leppard was always huge in Canada anyway, but of course, Brian would have been much bigger there than he was here. But I do remember it was all general admission. So baseball field, buy a ticket, rush. You know, I got as close as I could and was bumping uglies with all the moms. And what I remember though was the tickets were $42.50, which, I mean, in 2005, I don't, you know, what does that equate to now? $80?
Probably.
You know what I mean? But you know, it is
even still, that's
Yeah.
still a good deal.
Yeah, but it is funny though. We were talking about this before, Rob. You know how these artists and bands have, I mean, kind of blown up. I mean, in the States in the mid 2000s, in 2004, I mean, these minor league stadiums might hold, you know, 7,000-8,000 people.
Yeah.
And you know, 2 years later, it's playing 20,000 seat venue. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting how the times change, and who comes back and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Mhm. Wow.
Wild. Okay. I'm not going chronological here. I'm gonna share this one. It's kind of it's a sad one, but it's poignant. So I'll get it out of the way, and hopefully I'll get one more turn before the end of this, so I can kind of a happy note. But this is one that really, really makes me think of Dad, and this one profoundly moves me to tears still 15 years later. So this is Jim Cuddy's The Light That Guides You Home. Jim Cuddy's the front man for Blue Rodeo, pretty renowned singer-songwriter. Is just being inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame this year. This is an album that came out in 2006. And there is a song on here called Pull Me Through. And I will get through this without being emotional. Again, to spare the gory details, my dad died exactly 7 days before my wedding. Again, unexpectedly. Nobody saw it coming. So we're left with what do we do? And the prevailing opinion was we go ahead with the wedding because people are coming from out of town. It's all planned. And Dad would not want us to postpone it because, right? So we had Dad's funeral like 3 days before the wedding, and we had the wedding. And the first thing in the reception, obviously the bride and groom dance together, and then the groom has a dance with his mother. So my mom and I danced to this song, Pull Me Through, which I picked because it's a song about loss. It's a kind of a piano sort of thing. And it's about someone suffering through some profound loss, but it's also about someone else pulling them through that. And I thought it was pretty poignant because, I lost my dad and I have no siblings, and my mom had lost her husband, who she had been with for 50 years. Like they were high school sweethearts and whatever. And so it just kind of felt like there was only the two of us to help each other get through it. And so that's the song that my mom and I danced to at our wedding. And I will always remember what it felt like and, whatever. And just thinking to myself, I don't know how, but we're going to get through this. And we did. Unfortunately, my mother and my relationship since then has soured. But nonetheless, more than anything else, this reminds me of the darkest time in my life, but also, that there was some hope there. And again, it's another one of those, how music has the power to do things that, it's just a song, but it's not just a song. And to me, more than anything else, that song does it for me. So.
Thanks, Rob.
Can't follow that, but
we have to. It's your turn.
Sorry,
well, I'll go on and say that I think Fleetwood Mac and particularly ABBA were acts that my dad really connected with because they were fronted by a female, at least partly in some cases by a female. And I remember one day he was rifling through my brother's cassette collection, and I pulled out a couple cassettes. One of them was the Go-Go's. He absolutely adored the Go-Go's. I don't have any of their records, but another one he pulled out was Blondie's Parallel Lines. And I always think that if these songs were sung by a man, if it wasn't Debbie Harry or someone else, I don't think he'd care about this album. But he absolutely adored this record. And it's surprising to me. It surprised me at the time that he'd be interested. But I think my dad was trying to get more hip, if that makes any sense. He was trying to connect more with more contemporary music.
We've come a long way from him walking around the kitchen singing Frank. So
that's right. So he loved the Go-Go's, and he really latched on to Blondie in a big way, especially this record. He did hear some other stuff, but he really, really appreciated this. And I thought that was fantastic because I really like this record too. I thought this was amazing. So, hey, nice. So anyway, he loved this. And it started, I would think, his stronger interest in female singers, and unfortunately that led to places like Celine Dion, which we don't need to talk about, but in this case I thought he was right on the money. I thought that was an excellent choice.
The reason that I pulled this real quick, Brian, is this was my dad's.
Oh, is that right? Oh, cool.
Yes. And I'm not a giant Blondie fan, but I kept it as I went through his record collection because it was the only picture disc he had, and I'm like, well, I don't have any picture discs. This is kind of neat. But I just thought it meant something to your dad. This was my dad's copy.
Nice. Wow.
It's a great record. Well, this doesn't necessarily have a total huge emotional connection or time in my life necessarily. I just remember him loving this song. And one of the things, I'll go back to the contest I did, where I mean, truthfully, it was so great hearing from so many people and sharing stories, and like we said before, an opportunity for people to connect on maybe a deeper level, which wasn't necessarily the goal, but I guess it was a good result. But there was a handful of people who were getting choked up during videos and stuff, and so one of the things that I was thinking of was a song that I still hear today. And I immediately just think of my dad. And there's not a ton of songs like that, but this one always does. I have no idea why he loved this song so much. It's not really an artist that he cared about so much. It is a great song. And still every time I hear it, I think of him. But the song comes off this record. It comes off Night Moves from Bob Seger. And the song is Main Street. Whatever it was, I remember when I was 13, 14, picking up a guitar and getting lessons for the first time, he was like, can you play, can you learn that lead part in Main Street, sort of thing. And it's just so interesting. I mean, this was 20 years ago or whatever it was, and still every time I hear that song I just think of my dad. And again, I don't think he was a huge Bob Seger fan, it was like he was a Seger super fan or anything, but just one of those interesting sort of songs that he loved a lot. And I remember hearing it a lot, or when it would come on the radio he would turn it up, and it was just a song that he absolutely loved, and every time I hear it I still think of him. So yeah.
Nice.
Dad, for me, I remember when I dove headfirst into the Beatles. He's like, that's great and everything, but I want you to listen to other stuff. Whatever it is, I want you to listen to other stuff. And so I remember...
Have you tried John Lennon?
Right, yeah, exactly. I remember one Christmas, he did buy me 2 CDs in an effort to diversify my areas of interest. And I did not like either of them. And that's okay. He's like, you tried it. It's fine. It's funny that years later I would grow to appreciate one of those. And so I have it. This is not his copy. I had to buy it because when I went through his records, I wasn't in the right frame of mind, shall we say. So I didn't keep nearly enough. And this one I didn't keep, but Santana's Abraxas was the CD that he gave, 14 or 15-year-old me to try and get me to try something different. And while I didn't appreciate it at 14, at 30 or 35, I went, oh, I get it. So, every time I see this, I just kind of hear my dad going, "Told you so, told you so." And it's funny. I had done a video last year with my friend Bob that was in Wilco, and he was showing some of his favorite records, and he showed Abraxas, and talked about how when he heard it, it was just like, oh my god. And I went, yeah, my dad tried to give that to me when I was 15, and I didn't get it. So I always kind of chuckle. I don't even need to listen to it. Just seeing the cover alone makes me kind of, I told you so. And then it's sort of in the same, it's kind of a similar vein, I guess. This is one where I did get it. This kind of ties into Fleetwood Mac because Dad loved Christine McVie. And prior to Fleetwood Mac, she was in a band called Chicken Shack,
Yeah.
kind of a blues band. And this was an album that she played on called 40 Blue Fingers, Freshly Packed and Ready to Serve. And Dad had this, and as I was liking Fleetwood Mac, he used to listen to some Chicken Shack, and I was like, nah. I listened to this at the time, and I didn't really like it. And then about 6 months later, a guy that I was working with at Canadian Tire, Brian knows what that is. I got talking about music, and he got talking about Chicken Shack. And he was listening to this album, Imagination Lady. Now, this was after Christine had left and joined Fleetwood Mac. But I listened to this, and I was like, holy crap, this is phenomenal. So I ended up getting it on CD, and I brought it home one day, and I'm like, Dad, like what I got. And he just kind of had like this pleasantly, okay, now you get it. Mm-hmm. So when I think of Chicken Shack, it's always – I sort of feel Dad's, quiet sort of quiet approval or quiet satisfaction that I eventually found my way there, let's say.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
I guess back to me, I guess. I think to my dad's credit, he wasn't always vocal about the music I listened to. So that's something I think about as well. Like, my dad didn't always tell me my music was awful. And sometimes I think he grudgingly likes some things. But I was always very curious when I played a record, will my dad like this? Will he hate it? Will he say anything at all? And I was absolutely floored one day when he said to me, he kept in my room with a cassette and said, can you make a copy of that record you were playing? And I was like, you want me to make a copy of one of my records for your car? I just could not believe it. And this was the record he wanted a copy of, The Monks' Bad Habits. This was huge in Canada. Alex, you know this record? Yeah. This was massive. You don't know it?
No.
Oh my God. This was massive in Canada. It was a giant, Rob, you must know it.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. It was just one of those weird things. And so if you don't know, it's, they used to be in the Straubs as I understand it. And they sing in a full on, I guess it's a Cockney accent, and they're hilarious songs. They're like Nice Leg, Shame About Her Face is the lead off track. I Ain't Getting Any. You know what that is. And my dad loved the Carry On films. So that was right up his alley. What else? Inner City Kitty. Drugs in My Pocket was a single about this guy's drugs in my pocket. I don't know what to do with them. Hilarious. Like, he just thought this was the best thing he'd ever heard. And I partly wondered if it was because of the cover image, but Bad Habits, this woman dressed in a habit. But so funny that he played in his car, and I'd be in the car with him, and I'm thinking, this is really weird. At some point I was like, is this supposed to be happening? Is he supposed to be like playing my music in the car? It didn't seem right to me, but it was so funny that he liked this. And I don't know if any other adults around his age liked it, but he just loved this album, which made me laugh so much that he liked this record. Hilarious. So this is a classic from 1979, by the way. It's funny. It's just a funny record.
I've never even heard of it.
Yeah,
but it's funny because I like the Straubs. I mean, when you say, like,
it's totally different though. They've totally changed, and he is was from the UK, and so to hear those accents, I guess, was funny for him. But Benny Hill, I don't know if you know the Carry On movies, the kind of semi-salacious Carry On films. He just loved that kind of humor. So this kind of fit in with that, and I guess, and he just really thought it was hilarious. So
I think this is so fun. This is so good. So of course I have to, go to Wikipedia on this one. And, I pull up the Bad Habits record, and here we go. The final line in like the intro paragraph is, The album was surprisingly and nearly exclusively very popular in Canada, but made no impact in the United States and very little in the band's native United Kingdom.
Yeah. Hilarious. I've read that before. I forgot about it. It's so funny. Why? Why is that? I
Who
don't know.
knows? Who knows?
That's fantastic. So, well, and that was always like, I remember anytime I'd be listening to something and my dad would like it and he would go, what is that? And I was like, you like it? You like it? You know, it didn't happen much, but it happened sometimes. So, yeah, well, and I guess, you know, my last one, I don't remember. This was probably, you know, life got really complicated later in high school for us. My parents had separated. I had moved out to Indiana to move in with my dad my senior year of high school. So just kind of a tough transition point for me. And it was like, you know, I picked up my life and like left all my friends and my life to move out, you know, to live with my dad. And then, you know, it was a very challenging year because it was my last year of high school and just didn't really, you know, it was just a tough move. And then, you know, it was 2 years later, he was dead. So it was like, well, you know, okay, this is how life goes. Right. So, but sometime around then, I remember it must've been summer because I wasn't in school and we were working. I was working for him and we were kind of just driving all over the place. And had a lot of car time and truck time and all that kind of stuff. And so we were listening to some CDs, but what's so funny is I said this before of like those records that sold a gazillion copies that we still have memories with. I can't believe I no longer have a copy of this. I wonder if it was one of those where I think I had multiple copies and then I forgot that I gave one away. And then I gave the other one away thinking that I still had an extra, but I was digging. I could not find it at all. And the record I'm talking about is the Eagles' Greatest Hits, Volume 1. The highest selling album of all time, right? And so, you know, I grabbed just a couple different things. He was a big Eagles fan, and I think a lot of that was because, and he always would tell the story that he saw the Eagles fourth row on the Hell Freezes Over tour at Brown Stadium. What, 93, 94, something like that?
Something like that.
Looking at Rob, I know that's more up your alley. With support from a fairly unknown artist at the time, one Sheryl Crow, interestingly enough. And he would always tell this story about this drunk guy behind him who the entire show would just be screaming after every song, "Play Peaceful, Easy Feeling." And, you know, of course, that song probably comes at the end of the set. And so he always would play peaceful. Every time we would hear the song, he would go, "Play peaceful, easy feeling, peaceful, easy feeling." And so we listened to that Greatest Hits a lot. And it was so funny, like looking back at those songs now, of like, there were songs that we still, I mean, loved, right? I mean, even the songs that we've heard a bazillion times, still like, you know, "Take It Easy" is a great song. We loved "Already Gone," right? That was like one of the first like rock and roll kind of songs, right? We never really got into Witchy Woman. Both of us were like, I don't really do Witchy Woman. It was also, you know, thinking, us joking that, does Lion Eyes have 6 verses? This song just keeps going. You know, it's like, these were like some of these like, you know, very late night drives around when you're like, how long does this song go? So yeah, I mean, still to this day, when I listen to the Eagles and I think about those times out driving around and, you know, hearing and listening to all those songs and yeah, still loving a lot of them. I mean, the ones I didn't like then, I still don't really care for, and the ones I loved them, I still look back now really highly on. So yeah, Eagles, it was Greatest Hits, but anytime I hear those hits, obviously that's what I think of. So
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys more than you know. I mean, I don't want to just feel like, you know, just like end it. I mean, any last final I don't know, feelings or expressions of love and gratitude or anything like that, or memories that you want to make before we hop on out of here?
Well, I mean, I'm thankful that you asked us to do this because you know, I love talking about my dad. I talk about him a lot, and you know, it was actually, as hard as it was to lose him, which changed me profoundly. When I became a father myself, it was harder in a different way because my dad would have been an incredible grandfather and he never got the opportunity. And I see there's certain things that my son does and certain things the way my son is and even how my son looks. And I have pictures of my dad at the same age, and it's alarming, the similarities. And so, all of the things that I get to do with my son that my dad did with me. And I kind of wish my dad was around to see it. And, he missed the vinyl. My dad was like I said, off the top, he was a huge record guy, and he missed like
cool.
the vinyl resurgence by like a year,
Yeah.
He would have loved everything that's out on vinyl nowadays. And he would have loved the vinyl community thing. He would have been, he wouldn't have been making videos, but he would have been watching all of mine. I guarantee it. So, that's my dad there. His name was also Robert. So I'm named after him. I miss him dearly. But music brought us close when I was a teenager and into my early 20s. And it's still, when I'm down here in my music room, I kind of still feel like he's with me. So,
yeah. I guess my father would have watched my videos too had I told him about them. He probably would have watched them. But one of the things I really appreciated with my father with respect to music is, I just alluded to that he wasn't very outspoken about the kind of music I listened to. There's clearly things he didn't like, but there's areas where he did like, and I always appreciated that tolerance for music. And I don't know whether it was that example or not, but I try to be the same way with my kids. Like, it's just, they find their own path through music, all of my kids. And sometimes they're listening to things you just can't stand. And if you're in a car trip, it can be challenging, but I try not to be dogmatic about the music that I like. I don't shy away from playing music that I like, but I'm trying to sort of follow the example of being open-minded. And my dad, to his credit, we would be driving long distances, and he would not have control of the radio. He kind of surrendered that to us, which I thought was very nice of him, because he's the new one doing all the work. We're just sitting there. So that's something I sort of always appreciated about him, and just his fun-loving nature, the kind of like the gregarious, fun-loving party guy that he was. I think that's just fantastic. And so that's the kind of man he was. And that's, I try to be that way. It doesn't come through in my videos, though. I'm very stern in my videos, but I do appreciate that about him. And, I wish he'd lived a bit longer. He wasn't terribly young, but he, cancer comes for everybody. Well, not everybody, comes for many people, and it just was bad timing there. But I wish he'd had a few more years. If only he could have made it to the last ABBA record, that would have made him happy. But too far away. So, yeah.
Well, next time I listen to it, I'll think of your dad. How's that?
Okay.
Dedicate it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, and this is, I think, days like today, again, if people watch this on Father's Day, this video is not really about the views or anything like that, but more, like I said before, just an opportunity for us to connect. And, maybe some other people connect with this too, is, for a lot of people, this day is a day to cope, a day to process.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things I think, my dad's been gone for, I guess almost 14 years now. And he was lost him unexpectedly. It was like talk to him on a Wednesday and he was gone by Thursday. And so it's one of those things. And I think more so in the kind of deep philosophical way of how life works, but I also think, music and art is a part of that, of all the things he was right about and how much I look at some of those things now and I'm like, damn.
Yep.
He was right. He was right, and I was fighting it because I was some, snotty teenager or whatever. And so I just think kind of like what you said, Rob, and what you were getting at there too, Brian, of it outside of obviously missing them and wishing they were still here, obviously, just the things that they'd be able to see now and see what we're doing and all that kind of stuff. And so obviously, we miss them. And if people are watching this and you've lost your dad, just know that it's okay if today's not the best day in the world either. And, that's okay too. So, again, thank you guys so much for taking the time to do this, and hope you obviously have a great Father's Day with you or loved ones and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I guess that'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much. It was fun.
Thank you. Thanks,
Awesome.
everybody.
Appreciate you guys.